My name is Arthur Miller. 20 years behind the wheel. The lines on my face are like a map of the highways I've traveled, each one filled with thousands of miles of memories. I earned my living with the rumble of that massive 18-wheeler, hauling my cargo from one state to another, with the crackle of the radio as my only companion at night. I live in that small, perpetually rainy, quiet town just outside Portland, Oregon. No matter how long I was on the road, my heart always beat at home. With my wife Elara and our one and only son Leo, the unshakable center of my world. If you're reading these lines, pause for a moment and take a deep breath, because what I'm about to tell you is a nightmare that unfolded within the walls of my own home, the place I thought was my safest haven, while I was racking up the miles. It's the darkness that seeped into the void left by my absence while I was on the road, trying to provide a better future for my family. I was shaken by what I learned, because the secure foundation I had built my life upon slipped away from under my feet. If you too are far from your loved ones, your family, forced to watch them grow up through phone screens, perhaps you will find a piece of your own fears in my story. Sometimes we learn the hard way that those closest to us hold the darkest secrets. It all began with that shocking, inexplicable change in Leo. My son, Leo. He cannot use words like we do. It's as if there is an innate veil of silence between us. Doctors call it apraxia of speech, part of a complex syndrome. But this never meant Leo couldn't communicate. Leo was pure light. He had no words, but he had a huge heart. When I was away, he would draw the days on the calendar. When I returned home, he was the child who would run to the door the moment he heard the truck's engine in the parking lot, pound his chest with his little hands, then point at me and make the sign for Daddy's home, his laughter echoing off the walls of the house. Our world with him was a language far beyond words. Simple picture communication cards, hand gestures, and most of all, those eyes that spoke volumes, eyes that were always smiling and shining. Those eyes found 1,000 ways to say, "I love you." This time it wasn't 3 weeks, it was almost a month. I had returned from the scorching heat of the Arizona desert to the cool, damp rain of Oregon. As I parked the truck, I felt that familiar excitement, that sweet tightness in my chest. I opened the door, threw my bag on the floor, and called out, "I'm home!" But I didn't hear those little running footsteps. Silence. The silence inside the house was more deafening than my truck's engine. Leo came out of his room, but not running, slowly, dragging his feet. His shoulders were slumped. When he came to me, I bent down to hug him. I hugged him, but he didn't wrap his arms around me. His body was stiff as a board. I pulled back and looked into his eyes. But the light was gone. It was as if he wasn't there. It was as if my little boy was gone, replaced by a little stranger staring back at me with fearful eyes. "Are you okay, champ?" I asked, ruffling his hair as usual. He shook his head slightly as if to say yes. But this wasn't his yes. It was an obligation. He looked away from me. Just then, Elara appeared in the doorway, a kitchen towel in her hand, a forced smile on her face. "Ah, Arthur. Welcome back. How was your trip? Leo, say hello to your dad." Then she turned to me, lowering her voice. "He's tired. He's been a bit withdrawn lately. You know, Leo has his phases. He's growing up, hormones. What hormone could extinguish the light in a child's eyes like that?" She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. At that moment, the claim of normality in Elara's words, that he's just growing up cliché, sharpened that strange feeling inside me, that alarm bell. Leo had his phases, yes, but this was like the dead silence after a storm. That night at the table, I watched him closely. He had that special pasta Elara made in front of him, which he normally ate with gusto, but he was only tracing the patterns on the edge of the plate with his fork. His head was constantly bowed, and those glances, fearful, quick glances, he was constantly checking on Elara out of the corner of his eye. He flinched slightly when Elara reached for his plate or made a sudden noise. When he dropped his fork, he froze as if he had committed a terrible crime, holding his breath. Elara said with exaggerated sweetness, "It's okay, sweetie, I'll get a new one." But Leo's reaction wasn't that of someone who had dropped a fork. It was the fear of someone expecting an explosion, a punishment. The dark circles under his eyes were evidence of sleepless nights. Is there a problem at school? I tried to start a conversation. He shook his head, no. Are you and your friend Marcus not getting along? Again, no. The answer was always that damning silence. When it was time to put him to bed, I went to his room. I turned off the lights. Only the dim light seeping in from the hallway and the small moon-shaped nightlight on the wall illuminated the room. I sat down on the edge of his bed. I hoped he would break the silence, give me a sign. Leo, I whispered, Daddy's here, champ. You can tell me. Draw a picture. You'll use the communication cards. I know something's wrong. His eyes filled with tears. He raised his small, trembling hand and touched the picture of fear on the communication board, hanging on the wall next to his bed. Then he quickly pulled his hand away, as if he had touched something forbidden. He came closer to me and squeezed my hand. He squeezed so hard that his little fingernails dug into my palm. She looked at me imploringly and made 2 signs. First the sign for her mother, she brought her hand to her cheek. Then she shook her finger, meaning no or don't say it. My blood ran cold. What shouldn't I say, Leo? Your mother. What did your mother do? Just then we heard the door creak. Elara was there. Time for bed, Leo. Leo's whole body tensed. He buried himself deeper under the blanket, as if wanting to become invisible. The air in the room had turned icy with his mother's presence. This wasn't normal. This wasn't a loving mother-son relationship. I kissed his forehead and said, "Good night, champ." But as I left the room, my heart felt like it was in a vice. My head was filled with 1,000 questions and my stomach was filled with a cold fear. That night I tossed and turned in my bed. Something was very, very wrong, and I swore to find out what happened before setting out again. The following days passed like a detective piecing together clues. I was no longer a father but an observer. I noticed that Leo had abandoned every routine I knew and loved. He used to spend hours driving his little trucks on the city-patterned rug he spread on the living room floor, trying to imitate the sound of engines. Now those trucks were gathering dust in their baskets. When I tried to read him picture books, he would turn the pages indifferently, staring blankly at the funny animal pictures that used to make him laugh out loud. He spent most of his time alone in his room, the door ajar. He was drawing, but his drawings had changed too. My son, who used to draw smiling suns and cars in bright colors, was gone. In his place were scribbles dominated by black, purple, and dark blue colors that I couldn't make sense of. I showed these drawings to Elara and asked, "Don't you think these drawings are a bit dark?" to gauge her reaction. She brushed it off in her usual way, saying, "No, sweetie, you know he has his dark periods." One morning when Elara left home to go to the market and the post office, I caught that moment. Leo was sitting in the living room, watching the rain outside the window. I sat down next to him, keeping an arm's length between us, not wanting to startle him. We sat silently for a while. Then in a soft voice I said, "Champion, you have to help me. Your dad is a little confused." He didn't look at me. "Your dad needs to hit the road again soon." That word, road, had the effect of an electric shock. His head spun around to me, his eyes wide with horror. "No," he whispered. But no sound came out, only his lips moved. That look of panic on his face. He jumped up quickly, stumbled, and ran to the family calendar on the kitchen wall. On the calendar, the day I was leaving was circled in red pen. Leo began tapping that red circle repeatedly with his little finger. Fast, angry, helpless taps. Then he turned to me, raised both hands as if to say stop, and shook his head violently from side to side. Tears began to stream from his eyes. "You don't want me to go, do you?" I asked. He shook his head. "Why, son?" "While I'm gone. Doesn't your mother take good care of you?" The moment I asked that question, I regretted it. The fear on Leo's face gave way to pure horror. It was as if those words had struck his face like an invisible slap. He recoiled. His small body began to tremble, and he quickly covered his ears with his hands. He seemed to be saying, "No, no, no." I pulled him close and hugged him. At first he resisted. Then his small body trembled as he sought refuge in me. He was sobbing, but quietly. They were muffled sobs learned over the years, meant not to draw attention. "Dad," he said, his voice barely a whisper, and he made those signs again. First his mother, hand on cheek, then "Don't tell," shaking his finger. "Promise," I said, my heart breaking. "This is our secret, champ." How had my son learned to cry silently? What kind of fear was this? Why was my son so afraid of his own mother? Why did my presence mean not a protective shield for him, but the danger of her finding out? Just then, we heard the sound of a key turning in the front door lock. "I'm home!" Elara's voice echoed down the hallway. Leo's reaction was immediate and terrifying. He recoiled from me as if he'd seen a snake, wiped his tears with his sweater sleeve, and ran to his room. The sobbing child from a second ago was gone, replaced by that small stranger again, wearing his cold, expressionless mask. When Elara entered the living room with bags in her hands, she found me alone on the couch, frozen. "What were you two doing?" she asked cheerfully. I could sense the steel beneath that cheerfulness. "Nothing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We were just looking at the calendar." "Oh? Were you discussing the departure date? You know how sensitive Leo is about this. There's no point in upsetting him," she said, trying to shift the blame onto me. That night, after Leo fell asleep, I brought up the subject in bed. "Elara, I'm worried about the dark circles under Leo's eyes. And he's very quiet." I called his special education teacher at school, Ms. Pierce. She said he's been withdrawn for the past few weeks, not trying to communicate. Elara looked at me in the mirror as she applied night cream to her face. She was expressionless. "It's a phase, Arthur. I told you. Kids, especially kids like Leo, go through these ups and downs. You should know that better than anyone. But the nightmares? You told me he was having nightmares." "Yes, he was," she said without turning to me. "Kids do. Why didn't you tell me before? Why don't Mrs. Pierce's words match yours?" "Because you're on the road." He raised his voice slightly, then immediately composed himself. "Because I didn't want to worry you with Leo's little nightmares while you were driving. You have enough to think about, don't you?" His explanation made sense, on the surface at least, but that voice inside me, that trucker's intuition, was screaming that he was lying. That night I didn't let sleep take me. Eyes closed, breathing steady, I pretended to be asleep. It was past midnight. The house was silent. And then, just as I expected, I felt movement beside me. I sensed Elara listening to my breathing, slowly getting out of bed. I watched her shadow glide across the wall and silently leave the room. I waited a few minutes, my heart pounding in my chest. I slowly got out of bed, tiptoed into the hallway. The house was pitch black, only the faint light from the night lamp at the end of the hallway. Leo's door was slightly ajar. Elara was inside. I moved silently toward the door. I didn't know what to do. I just listened. I waited there in the cold corridor for about 20, maybe 30 minutes, holding my breath. Then the door slowly opened and Elara slipped out. When she saw me as a dark silhouette in the darkness, she let out a muffled scream. "Arthur, God, you scared me to death." She had her hand on her chest. "What were you doing in his room at this hour?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper but sharp as steel. "What was I supposed to do?" she said in that nervous whisper. "I was checking on him. He was having a nightmare, woke up. I stayed with him to calm him down." "Why? What kind of interrogation is this? Did it take 30 minutes to calm a nightmare, Elara?" The look in his eyes changed. That fake concern was gone, replaced by cold anger. "Sometimes yes, Arthur. Sometimes it takes. Now go back to bed, you have work in the morning." We went back to bed, but I didn't sleep a wink that night. Why hadn't I heard a single sound, a single cry, a single murmur from my son's room while his mother was calming him down? Doesn't a child having a nightmare make a sound? Or was he being silenced? The next morning, Elara acted as if nothing had happened at breakfast. It was as if that icy confrontation the night before had never happened. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said cheerfully, placing a cup of coffee in front of me. "Leo and I have already had breakfast. I'm going to drop him off at school." This feigned normality was even more frightening than the whisper I had heard the night before. After Elara dropped Leo off at school, I went straight to my son's room in the stifling silence of the house. The room was tidy, as always, too tidy, as if a crime scene had been meticulously cleaned. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. A clue, evidence, anything that might support or disprove my silent nightmare theory. I looked in his closet, rummaged through his drawers. Then I checked under his bed, and I found it. It was the old plush bear I had bought him years ago, which he had named Captain Paw. That bear was Leo's voice. When he couldn't speak when he was sad or angry, he would hug that bear and confide in it. But the bear was very different from how I remembered it. Captain Paw was battered. Its left arm was almost torn off, the stitches had come undone. But that wasn't what horrified me. There were dark, hard stains on the teddy bear's fabric, especially around its eyes and mouth. Dried tear stains. It was as if my son, unable to speak, had poured all his pain, all his silent screams into this defenseless toy and cried into it. When I picked up the bear, the last shred of doubt inside me turned into an icy rage. My son would never treat his toys like this. This wasn't a child's anger. This was the silent cry of a victim. That night, the idea of sleep didn't even cross my mind. When Elara fell asleep, I played that silent game again. I regulated my breathing and remained motionless. Around 1 o'clock, she stirred. She got up. She left the room. This time I waited. 10 minutes. I slowly got up and slipped into the hallway, closer than last night, right up to the door frame. I pressed my ear against the cold wood. At first I heard nothing, only Elara's muffled whisper. "I told you, discipline." And then I heard it, a sound. Not crying, a thud. A hollow, sickening sound. Then Leo's muffled, drawn-out, breathless sob. He couldn't scream. He was just sucking in air. "Be quiet!" Elara's whisper was a hiss. "You'll wake your father. This is for your own good. You must learn to suffer in silence." I froze behind the door. My body was frozen solid, but my mind was on fire. I wanted to burst in, shoulder the door open, and take my son from that woman's hands. But a part of me, that 20-year trucker's logic, told me to stop. If I went in now, she would deny it. She would say I was calming the nightmare. She would say I just straightened the blanket. My suspicion would be insufficient against her lies. Leo couldn't speak. He was my only witness, and he was silent. They might not believe me. I needed visual evidence. Irrefutable, undeniable evidence. To legally take my son out of this house, I needed to show the world exactly what was behind that door. The next morning, I told Elara I needed to get an urgent spare part for the truck, and that the service station was in the city center. It was a lie, but it was the most important lie of my life. Your trip to Texas is coming up, isn't it?" "Sure, I'll take care of it," she said, sipping her coffee. I looked at her face then, and wondered if anything remained of the woman I had married. "I went to that big electronics store in the city center." I told a young clerk, "I need a very small, impossible-to-spot, Wi-Fi-enabled camera." "For home security, sir?" he asked. A lump formed in my throat. "Yes," I said. "For my son's safety." I left the store with a small black square, barely worth a penny. When I got home, Elara was in the kitchen, preparing dinner while listening to loud music. Leo was still at school. The timing was perfect. I quickly went to Leo's room. Where should I hide it? Somewhere he could see the whole room but would never notice. My eye caught the bookshelf. On the top shelf was Leo's collection of dusty stuffed toys that he no longer played with. I placed the camera in a dark corner, between the legs of an old stuffed bear. Not Captain Patty, another one. The lens was pointing directly at the bed. With trembling hands, I opened the app on my phone. Live stream. The image was clear. I could see the bed, the door, most of the room. At that moment, I felt both relief and terrible guilt. I was violating the privacy of my own home. But I knew. This was the only way to break my son's silence, to make his silent scream heard. That evening's dinner was the most difficult, most stomach-churning performance of my life. Sitting at the table, knowing the camera was there, waiting for what was about to happen. My stomach was in knots. Every bite felt like a shard of glass lodged in my throat. Elara, however, acted as if she were the most normal, happiest mother in the world. She talked about the neighbors, the sales at the supermarket, the cake she planned to bake for the weekend. She talked about cake while my son was suffering. Leo was his usual self, head bowed, silent, mashing the peas on his plate with his fork. "Not tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow I have to hit the road again," I said, trying to keep my voice as normal as possible. A long trip to Texas. It was like a bomb had dropped on the table. The fork in Leo's hand hit the edge of the plate and fell with a clatter. I saw his shoulders slump, his breath catch. Elara's reaction was more controlled, but I could swear I caught that cold, almost imperceptible flicker of relief in her eyes for a moment. "Ah, yes, that big shipment," she said, softening her voice with feigned sorrow. "How long will it take this time, dear?" "At least 2 weeks," I said, not taking my eyes off Leo. "Maybe longer." Elara smiled. That smile reached her lips, but her eyes remained ice cold. "We'll miss you so much." "Won't we, Leo dear?" My son didn't answer. He just bowed his head even lower, as if he wanted to disappear into the plate. After dinner, I went to put him to bed. When we were alone in the room, I closed the door and sat down on the edge of his bed. He took my small, cold hand. He squeezed my hand so tightly that his nails dug into my palm. It was as if he was trying to physically keep me in that room, in that house. His eyes pleaded. "Dad," he whispered, his voice failing him, only his lips moving. Then he quickly made the signs. "Don't go. Stay here." "I have to go, champ," I said, my heart breaking. "I have to work." His eyes instantly filled with tears. He shook his head violently from side to side, not wanting to let me go. I moved closer to him. "Leo," I whispered, "you know you can tell me everything, right? Even if someone tells you, don't say it." Leo's reaction wasn't what I expected. He didn't try to tell me anything. Instead, he stared at the door in horror, as if afraid his mother was listening to us from behind the walls. He moved away from me, covering his ears with his hands. He couldn't even make the "I'm scared" sign. He had become fear itself. Just then we heard footsteps in the hallway. Elara was coming. "It's time for you to sleep too, Arthur," she said, standing in the doorway. Her voice was cheerful, but her eyes pierced through us. "You need to rest well before the long journey." I hugged Leo one last time and whispered in his ear, "I love you, son. Always." When I left the room, Elara followed me to our bed. We lay down and turned off the lights. The longest, darkest hours of my life had begun. I regulated my breathing and pretended to be asleep. My heart was beating so fast, so violently, that I feared Elara would hear the tremor in my chest. An hour passed. Maybe an hour and a half. She stirred beside me. She was sure I was in a deep sleep. Silently, like a shadow, she got out of bed and slipped out of the room. I quickly reached for my phone under the blanket. The cold light of the screen hit my face. I opened the camera app. My heart was about to stop, and there it was. In that grainy, black and white night vision, my son's room. The door slowly opened. Elara's silhouette appeared. She quietly closed the door behind her. Leo was lying in bed, but awake, he knew, as if he had been waiting for her. I saw that he was tiny under the quilt, pulling the blanket up to his chin. I heard him whisper, "Mom, please. I was good today. You know that doesn't matter, right?" Elara replied. Her voice was unrecognizable, ice-cold, emotionless, mechanical. "This is for your education." And then I saw that thing that froze my blood. Elara pulled a roll of packing tape from her robe's pocket. At that moment, on that small phone screen, I watched my wife, my son's mother, move toward the bed with tape in her hand. Leo's eyes were wide with fear. "Please," he begged, his voice trembling. "Shh," said Elara, putting her finger to her lips. "The neighbors can't hear. Your father can't hear." With a quick movement, she tore off a piece of tape and without hesitation, she stuck it over my son's mouth, who couldn't speak. My stomach churned. This was pointless. Leo couldn't scream anyway. His loudest sound was a whisper. This wasn't to stop him from screaming. This wasn't to silence him. This was to nullify him. It was to take away even that tiny sound he had, that whisper, that please. This was pure, unadulterated cruelty. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. "This is better," Elara said in a low voice. "Now we won't disturb anyone with your quiet sobs, will we?" Then from the other robe pocket, she pulled out the wooden, stiff-bristled hairbrush from the bathroom. Leo tried to plead with his eyes, his mouth still closed. Silent tears began to roll down his small face. "This is for your own good," she continued in that icy voice. "You need to learn discipline." And then she began to strike. These weren't light taps or disciplinary slaps like some parents give. These were hard, rhythmic blows. The stiff side of the brush against his small legs and buttocks. Leo's body couldn't make a sound because of the tape, but it shook with every strike. I could hear his muffled, gasping breaths, his pain-filled sobs. I wanted to bolt from the room, break that door down, snatch that brush from his hand. But I froze. My body refused to move. Part of me, that ruthless logic, knew I needed concrete, undeniable proof of what had happened. To break Leo's silence, to be his voiceless voice, I had to record that cruelty. With a broken heart, acid burning my throat, I kept recording. "This," I heard Elara say between blows, "is for using those stupid communication cards with your father, for trying to tell him things, for whispering our secrets to him." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it stopped. Leo lay in the fetal position on the bed, his small body trembling. Elara leaned toward him. "Don't forget our agreement," she said. "If you make even the slightest sign to your father, I'll know, and it will be much worse." Then she quickly pulled the tape from his mouth. I saw Leo grimace in pain. "Now dry your face and sleep. I won't hear a sound. Do you understand?" Leo nodded in terror. Elara calmly smoothed the blanket over him, as if she had just been folding her son's laundry. "Good night, Leo," she said. She left the room, closing the door gently behind her. In the darkness of my room, the phone still in my hand, the images of what I had just witnessed etched into my mind, I cried silently. I had watched my own son being tortured. The woman I had loved for years, the mother of my child, was a monster. Those trips, those long separations, how long had this been going on? That battered teddy bear, Captain Paw. I now saw what that bear had seen. Minutes later, Elara returned to our bed. She lay down quietly, even sighing softly. I pretended to be asleep, but every fiber of my being despised her, wanted to yell at her, to ask her how she could do this to our child. But I knew I had to be strategic. Leo was in danger, and I had to move carefully to protect him properly. I stayed awake all night, periodically checking the camera. I watched Leo, after his mother left, hugging that battered Captain Patty and crying silently. Finally, I watched him fall asleep from exhaustion and swore I would do anything to get my son out of that hell. The next morning, when the first rays of sunlight filtered into the room, I was already awake. I hadn't blinked for even a second. Beneath the mask of exhaustion on my face lay an icy fury and a steely resolve. Elara got up after me, yawned, and smiled as if she had slept the most innocent sleep in the world last night. "Good morning, my love. Are you ready for the journey?" I looked at her then and dug my nails into my palms to suppress the disgust inside me. "I'm ready," I said, trying to hide the crack in my voice. "I'll make breakfast for Leo." When she appeared in the kitchen, my son's face bore the horror of the previous night. The circles under his eyes were dark, his gaze vacant. Elara said to Leo, trying to appear innocent, "The nights before departure are always sleepless, aren't they?" I trembled with rage. When I placed the cornflakes in front of him, I crouched down to his level. Elara was behind us, busy with the coffee machine. "Champion," I whispered. He slowly raised his eyes. I could see the pain, the fear, and a sense of shame hidden in those eyes. "Look at me," I said quietly. "I love you so much." I held his small hands. "And I'll do anything to protect you. Do you believe me?" For a brief moment, a glimmer of hope flickered beneath that numbness. But the moment we heard Elara approaching, that light went out and was replaced by that same pure fear. She quickly pulled her hand away from me. "What a lovely father-son moment," Elara said as she entered the kitchen. "Come on, Leo, hurry up. You'll be late for school." After breakfast, while Elara was taking Leo to school, I moved quickly. I retrieved last night's recording from the camera in my son's room. I uploaded the file from my phone to an encrypted cloud account, and also copied it to a small, unmarked flash drive I carried with me. I couldn't risk losing that terrible vital evidence. The file name was simple: Evidence Leo. By the time it was time to hit the road in the afternoon, this was far from a normal business trip. This was an escape, a plan. As I carried my bags to the door, Elara hugged me. "Drive carefully," she said. Even the touch of her skin against mine made my stomach churn. I pulled away. "I will." Leo was standing at the door, saying goodbye to him. The thought of leaving my son alone in that house with that monster, that was the hardest part of the plan. I knelt down and hugged him tightly. "Listen to me, champ," I whispered in a voice only he could hear. "It won't be long. I promise. Be strong. I felt Leo's little arms clinging tightly to me, not wanting to let go. His eyes were teary when he left me, but he nodded. He understood, or hoped he did. I got in the truck, turned the key, and drove off. Every mile away from home was torture. I wasn't going to Texas. I pulled over at a rest stop just 20 miles from the city. I wouldn't leave my son in that house for another night. In the dark cabin of the truck, I reached for my phone with a heavy heart. I couldn't wait for that night's scene to repeat itself. With trembling hands, I called my brother-in-law, Marcus Thorne, Elara's brother. Marcus had always been a decent man. Honest, reliable, and most importantly, he adored Leo. Despite being his brother, he was the only person I could trust in this situation. "Arthur, shouldn't you be on the road?" He answered, his voice anxious. "Marcus, I need your help," I said, trying to control my voice. "This is an emergency. It's about Leo. What happened? Is he sick? Did he fall?" "No, worse. Marcus, I want you to go to my house right now and get Leo out of there." "Right now? What? What are you talking about?" "Elara. Make up any excuse," I cut him off. "Say it's Sophia's birthday coming up. Tell her you need Leo's manpower to set up the big playhouse you bought for her. I know it's stupid, but make something up. Just get my son away from Elara, please. Arthur, you're scaring me to death. What's going on?" "Marcus, I don't have time to explain everything right now. I'm on the highway, far from home. Can I trust you? My son's life may depend on it." There was a long, tense silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard Marcus's serious and determined voice. "Yes, you can trust me. I'm going to get Leo right now." "Thank you," I sighed, closing my eyes. "Call me when you get him safely. And Marcus, please don't let Elara know anything. Act normal." I hung up and leaned back against the truck's steering wheel. That hour-and-a-half wait was harder than my longest trip to Texas. I started the truck and drove straight home. The delivery, the job, none of it mattered. My phone rang. It was Marcus. "Arthur, Leo is with me." At my house. I told Elara I needed help setting up the surprise playhouse for Sophia. She was a little suspicious, but she seemed to like the idea of guys hanging out together, so she let him come. "He's watching cartoons with my daughter Sophia." I closed my eyes, silently giving thanks. "How is he?" "Quiet, very quiet." "And scared. He asked about you a few times in the car." With gestures. "Can I talk to him?" "Of course." I heard rustling and then my son's small, breathy whisper. "Dad." "Hey, champ," I said, trying to hold back my tears. "Are you okay with Uncle Marcus?" "I'm okay," he whispered. "Dad, are you coming to get me?" "I'm coming, son." "I'm driving home right now. I'll get there as fast as I can, okay? Stay with your uncle until then." "Okay," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice, the tension melting away. That simple "okay" broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. My son was acting as if it were a favor that I was rescuing him from an abusive situation. After talking to Leo, Marcus called back. "Arthur, for God's sake, are you going to tell me what's going on?" "Leo is terrified of going home." "What did Elara do?" "Marcus," I said, my voice breaking. "I know this is going to be the hardest thing to believe, but your sister, Elara, is physically abusing Leo. I have video evidence." A long, shocked silence. That can't be true. Elara wouldn't do that. She would never do that to Leo." "I didn't want to believe it either," I replied. "But I saw it with my own eyes. I had placed a camera in her room. While I was asleep or out, she'd go into his room, tape his mouth shut so he couldn't talk. And hit him." "Oh, my God," Marcus whispered, his voice choked. "I have the videos. I'll show you when I get there. For now, I just need to know my son is safe. He's here. He's safe. Elara keeps calling. I'll distract her. You just drive, Arthur. Drive fast." I hung up the phone and stepped on the gas. All night long, I drove nonstop toward home, toward my son. The rhythmic hum of the truck's engine mingled with the sound of that horrific video playing over and over in my mind. The asphalt slipping beneath me felt like an endless loop of those scenes on that small, grainy screen. Elara's icy voice. "This is for your training." Leo's silent, muffled sobs. The sharp click of the brush. I thought of my son. Those scars, the permanent damage that months, perhaps years of abuse would leave on his soul. A mother? How could she do this to her own child, especially one who couldn't speak up, who couldn't cry for help? Had this silence, this inability to speak, become a shield for Elara? Around 5 in the morning, I pulled into the eerie, fluorescent lights of a gas station. I had to fill up the tank, wash my face, and get out of that cabin for a moment. I was physically and emotionally exhausted. While waiting for the attendant to fill the tank, I took out my phone with trembling hands. It wasn't curiosity. It was a necessity. I needed to know what was happening at home. I connected to the camera. Leo's room was empty. The bed was made, Captain Patti was thrown on the pillow. But then I turned on the living room camera, and I saw Elara. In the early morning, she was pacing back and forth in her pajamas, phone in hand, talking frantically. I couldn't hear her voice, but I tried to read her lips. Then I thought to turn up the phone's volume. The camera was picking up ambient sound too. Muffled though it was, I heard Elara's panicked voice. "I don't know, Mom," she was saying, most likely talking to her own mother. "Marcus took Leo yesterday and hasn't brought him back yet. He's not answering my calls. Something's very wrong. Arthur too. Arthur called and said he'd be back early from his trip." His voice was so cold. There was a pause as she listened to the other end. No, it's not that he knows anything. How could he? That stupid kid can't even speak." I felt my blood rush to my head. Can't talk. He saw this as an advantage, a blanket to cover his guilt. "I have to hang up now," Elara said. "I'll call Marcus again. If he doesn't answer, I don't know. She hung up the phone and buried her head in her hands on the chair she had collapsed into. But she wasn't crying. She was just thinking, formulating a strategy. I closed the app and returned to the truck. As I pulled out of the gas station, the last shred of mercy inside me had evaporated. This wasn't just a rescue operation. This was a war. Finally, when I arrived in town, it was past 9 in the morning. The sun had already risen. People were going about their business, and the world was turning as if no terrible night had ever happened. As agreed, I went straight to Marcus's house. When he opened the door, Marcus looked 10 years older than the man I had spoken to on the phone yesterday. His eyes were bloodshot. "He's still sleeping," he said quietly, letting me in. He only fell asleep around 5 this morning. He seemed afraid to close his eyes. "Can I see him?" Marcus led me to the guest room where Leo's cousin Sophia was curled up asleep on the spare bed. I sat on the edge of the bed and slowly ran my hand through his hair. Even in sleep, he was not at peace. He moaned softly, twitching. "Arthur," Marcus called from the hallway. "My wife Clara wants to talk to you. We need to talk now." I left the room, leaving the door ajar so I could hear if Leo woke up. In the living room, Marcus and his wife Clara were waiting for me with worried expressions. Clara's eyes were swollen from crying. "Last night," Clara began, her voice trembling, "they wanted to take a bath with Sophia. I took Leo's clothes off." She paused, a sob catching in her throat. At first he was embarrassed. He didn't want to take them off. Leo was trying to hide the abuse out of fear. "There are marks on your back, Arthur," he continued. "Old yellowed marks and new ones. Dark purple parallel lines as if, oh my God, as if he'd been beaten with a stiff bristled brush." I shook my head, feeling my tears well up again. "Yes," I said hoarsely. "He was beaten. I saw it." "You said you had videos," Marcus reminded me, his voice cold as ice. I took out my phone. I placed the flash drive on the table. "You need to see this," I said, "but it's not easy." On that small phone screen, they watched the 2 minutes of hell I had recorded last night. Clara ran out of the room within the first 30 seconds, letting out a muffled scream and covering her mouth with her hand. Marcus watched until the end. His face was pale, expressionless, but I could see he was gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. When the video ended, when the phone screen went dark, Marcus didn't speak for minutes. He just stared at the empty wall across from him. "Oh my God, Arthur," he finally whispered. This is monstrous. This is my sister, Elara. Can't be." "I didn't want to believe it either," I replied, picking up the phone. "But we need to move fast. Elara is already suspicious. I need to go to the police." Just then, a small voice came from the hallway. "Dad?" Leo was standing there, rubbing his sleepy eyes. When he saw me, he paused for a moment, as if unsure whether I was real. Then he ran toward me with all his might and threw himself into my arms, sobbing. I held him tight, pressing my son's small, trembling body against my chest. And in that moment I swore. Never again would I let anyone hurt him. "Dad," he whispered in my ear, "you're back." "I'm here, champ," I whispered back. "Your dad is here, and I'm not going anywhere anymore." I sat down on the couch with Leo in my lap, his face buried in my chest, his little hands clutching my shirt as if afraid I might disappear at any moment. Marcus and Clara gave us space, whispering as they retreated to the kitchen to make coffee. I just sat there holding my son. I felt the tremors in that little body slowly subside, those tense little muscles relax. I don't know how long we stayed like that. 5 minutes, an hour. Time had lost its meaning. Finally, when I felt he was calmer, I gently took him by the shoulders and made him look at me. "Champion," I said softly, "I need to talk to you about something very important." He lifted his face, his eyes still red from crying. There was so much fear there, so much pain for such a small child. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," I continued, taking his small hands in mine. "I know what happened while I was away. I know what my mother did to you at night. This wasn't the reaction I expected. I expected relief, maybe some acknowledgement, but instead, Leo's body instantly tensed like a spring, and pure, unadulterated panic grew in his eyes. He tried to get out of my arms quickly, wanting to get away from me. "Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling. And then he made those little signs, so fast his hands blurred. "No. Don't tell. He'll get angry. He'll get very angry." "Leo, calm down," I said, holding him gently. "Look at me. He won't get angry because he can't hurt you anymore. Do you understand?" But he wasn't listening to me. He was panicking. "You didn't say anything, son. You didn't break the secret. I found out myself." That stopped him for a moment. He looked confused. To calm him down, I showed him that the door was locked and he couldn't hurt him. "How?" he whispered. "Before you left on your trip, I had placed a camera in your room. A little eye just to keep an eye on you, and I saw everything that happened." Leo looked at me, his little mind trying to process this new information. Camera, eye, saw. "Did you see?" he whispered. "I did, son," I said, my voice breaking. "I saw that stupid tape over your mouth. I saw that brush in your hand. I saw everything." He bowed his head in shame. His shoulders slumped. And then he whispered those 2 words that tore my heart apart. "I'm sorry, Dad." Those 2 words burned right through me. My son was apologizing to me for the torture he had endured. I cupped his face in my hands, made him look at me. "Leo, listen carefully to what your father has to say. You did nothing wrong, nothing. What your mother did to you was wrong. Very wrong." He looked into my eyes, wanting to believe what I was telling him. "She hit you because you talked to me, didn't you? In my room, because you used those communication cards. Because you whispered our secrets to her." Slowly, painfully, he shook his head. "How long has this been going on, son?" He bit his lip, hesitated. Then he made those little signs, long. He looked into my eyes and then pointed to the calendar. "Trips. Since you started those long trips?" He shook his head again. Why didn't you tell me, champ?" His eyes filled with tears again. "I was scared," he whispered. "If I told anyone." He said no one would believe me, that I was just a mute child seeking attention. He said even you wouldn't believe me. A year. For a year my son lived through this hell, and I was on the road unaware, thinking I was giving him a better life. All those journeys, all those nights. I had left my son alone with his monster in his own home. How could I have been so blind? Those black scribbles, those silent sobs, those cold eyes. They were all cries for help. A cry I couldn't hear. "I never would have thought that, Leo," I said, hugging him tightly. "Never. You can always tell me everything. I will always believe you." Just then, Marcus returned to the living room. Clara was behind him. The look on their faces was determined. "Well, Arthur," Marcus said, his voice hard. "What are you going to do now?" I stood up, took Leo in my arms. "I'm going to the police station," I said firmly. "I'll show them the videos, file a report, and request an emergency protection order, restraining order for Leo. I'll do whatever it takes to keep my son safe. This will destroy your family, you know that, right?" Marcus said, as if talking to himself. "Elara could go to prison." I looked at him seriously. "Marcus, I know she's your sister, but what she did, what she's been doing for months, It already destroyed our family. A mother who tortures her own child doesn't deserve that title. And yes, if the justice system decides she should go to prison, so be it. Marcus slowly shook his head. He held his wife Clara's hand. You're right. It's just accepting that my own brother is capable of something like this. God, what can we do to help? Clara asked. You're already helping? I said. By giving us shelter. By protecting my son when I couldn't. I just need you and Sophia to stay with Leo while I go to the police station. I don't want him to go through this too. Of course, Marcus said immediately. You can stay here as long as you need to. He'll be safe. My phone kept ringing as I went to the police station. It was Elara. She was panicking. I ignored the first few calls, but just before I got to the station, on the 5th try, I answered. I needed to buy time. Hello, I said, my voice ice cold. Arthur, she screamed, a hysterical relief in her voice. Thank God. Marcus took Leo last night and hasn't brought him back yet. He's not answering my calls. I'm worried, Arthur, something's wrong. This hypocrisy. She was worried about the son she had methodically tortured. Fine, I replied, still with Marcus. Why did you come back early? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come home? Where are you? A barrage of questions. I'm taking care of some business. I brushed it off. Later. We'll talk. Arthur, what's going on? Answer me right now. We'll talk when I get there, I replied, and hung up before he could ask any more questions. I walked into the sheriff's office. He was tired, dirty, and heartbroken, but I had a flash drive in my hand. I explained the situation to the detective at the desk, Detective Miller. He listened calmly, with the weary demeanor of a man who had heard these kinds of stories before. Then I handed him the flash drive. You need to see this, I said. My son can't talk. Miller plugged the flash drive into his computer and put on his headphones to watch the video. His face slowly shifted from that professional indifference to a barely controlled anger. When the 2-minute video ended, he took off his headphones and looked at me. Mr. Sterling, he said, his voice hard. This is one of the clearest and most disgusting cases of child abuse I've ever seen. Especially with the victim having a speech impediment. What was done? It's monstrous. We'll take all necessary measures, Miller continued. We'll file a report immediately and request an emergency protection order to keep your wife away from the child. What about custody of my son? You can apply for temporary custody as soon as the process moves forward. With this evidence, Mr. Sterling, I see no reason why the judge would deny this request. When I left the police station, I walked out with a ton of weight on my shoulders, but also a gram of relief. The battle was just beginning. On my way back to Marcus's house, I received a call from an unknown number. It was the court clerk. He informed me that they had just served Elara with the protective order notice. She didn't react well, Mr. Sterling, the clerk said in a weary voice. She became agitated. She became hysterical. She claimed it was all a lie, that you were plotting to take her son away. She tried to resist the officers. At that moment, I thought, if she resisted the officers, what would she do to me and Leo? That was to be expected, I replied wearily. Do you have a safe place to stay with the little one? Yes, we're at my brother-in-law's. Excellent. The order is clear. He cannot come within 500 meters. Call 911 immediately if there are any problems. I hung up the phone. The notification had been made. The first move in the war had been made, and the other side's response would not be long in coming. When I arrived at Marcus's house, I found Leo in the living room, quietly watching cartoons with his cousin Sophia. When he saw me, he ran and hugged me. You're back, he whispered. I promised you, didn't I? I said, trying to smile. Dad always keeps his promises. While Clara stayed in the living room with the kids, Marcus called me into the kitchen. Did you take care of the police? Yes, the protection order is out. They just served it. Marcus breathed a sigh of relief. Thank God, because Elara came here. I felt the blood drain from my face. What, when? About an hour ago. While you were at the station, he said quietly. She was furious. She was having a hysterical fit. She screamed that I was making up lies about her, that we were trying to separate her from her son. She tried to go inside to see Leo. She tried, but I didn't let her. I stood in the doorway. Clara took the children to the back room. I told her she needed to calm down, that we could talk later. She yelled at me, Marcus said, his voice breaking. She asked how I could betray her brother. He asked how you turned him against me. He said I couldn't believe him, that I believed a liar. What did you say to him, Marcus? Marcus looked me in the eye. I told him I saw the video. There was a long silence. I told him, Elara, I saw that brush, that tape. I heard those silent sobs. This isn't discipline, this is monstrosity, I said. What did she do? She denied it. That video is fake. You set me up. He was just a naughty child. I didn't know how to discipline him because he couldn't talk. She shouted then. Then she threatened to call the police. That's when the police officers arrived, Clara added, joining us at the door. To serve the restraining order, right here at our doorstep in front of everyone. When he got the order, his face, said Marcus, his face changed. The hysteria went. It was replaced by ice-cold hatred. You'll pay for this, he said. Both of you. I'll get my son back and you'll never see him again, Arthur. Then he got in his car and left. We'll have to leave here, I said, running my hand through my hair. I don't want to involve you any further in this. He's dangerous. Don't be ridiculous, Arthur, Marcus said, putting his hand on my shoulder. You can stay here as long as you need to. My house is big. It's safe. And she may be my sister, but what she did is unforgivable. That night, as I put Leo to bed in the guest room, he asked me to stay until he fell asleep. I sat beside the small bed, watching him tentatively touch the new soft toy dog Clara had given him to replace Captain Paw. The Captain Paw in our room was no longer a symbol of innocence but of trauma. We sat in silence for hours. I saw him startle at every creak in the hallway, every sound of a car outside. Even when he finally fell asleep from exhaustion, he was not at peace. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a muffled whisper. Dad! Leo was sitting up in bed, his eyes wide with terror. He was having a nightmare. I'm here, champ, I said immediately, sitting down beside him and pulling him into my arms. You're safe. It was just a bad dream. He was trembling. He buried his face in my chest. Mom, he whispered. Did she come to take me? No, son, I said firmly, holding his small hand. Never again. I promise you. Your daddy is here and no one can ever hurt you again. He was silent for a few more minutes. Then in that small trembling voice, he asked what was perhaps the most important question of my life. Daddy? Yes, son. You won't go away again, will you? He used his signs. You, pointing at me, and go, a hand gesture moving away. You won't. Go on the road? At that moment, in that dark room, looking into my son's fearful eyes, everything became clear. The truck, the roads, the shipments, none of it mattered. No, son, I said, surprised by the resolve in my own voice. No more long journeys. It's over. Your father is here now. Just you and me. On his face, I saw the first genuine relaxation I had seen in a long time, an expression reminiscent of a slight smile. Shortly after, holding my hand tightly, he fell asleep, truly at peace this time. I stayed there, watching my son sleep safely for perhaps the first time in months, and vowed to do everything to rebuild our lives. The next day, I received a call from the lawyer I had hired to handle the custody case. He had news. Mr. Sterling, the judge has granted your request for temporary custody. Till the case is resolved, you have sole custody of Leo. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. Your wife, Ms. Elara, if she agrees, will have supervised visitation rights, but only in a neutral location and with a professional appointed by the court. I need to talk to Leo about this, I said hesitantly. Of course. But his lawyer has already started preparing a counterclaim. He'll try to get custody back by using your unstable job and long-term absence against you. When I hung up the phone, I saw Leo watching me from the kitchen doorway. Dad, are we going to be okay? He whispered. I opened my arms and he ran to me. I hugged him with all the strength of my love. Yes, son, I said. I promise you we'll be okay. The following weeks were like a period of adjustment and a calm before the storm. Despite Marcus and Clara's insistence, we rented a small furnished apartment to avoid putting them in further danger and to establish our own routine. It was close to Marcus's house, meaning our safe haven was still within arm's reach. On our first night in the new home, Leo refused to sleep alone in his room. I spread a blanket on his bed, and that night I slept on the cold floor next to my son's bed, one hand holding his small hand. This was the beginning of a ritual that would last for weeks. I could hear him moaning and twitching in his sleep, but whenever he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was me. This was his new security. Making the hardest decision turned out to be easier than I thought. I called my boss. I summarized the situation as a serious and urgent family matter. I said I had to give up long trips. He was surprised, disappointed, but when he heard the determination in my voice, he backed down. "I can't lose you, Arthur," he said. "But I understand. We have an opening in the warehouse in logistics planning. You'll be home at night. But the salary won't be the same. It'll be half." "I accept," I said without hesitation. "When do I start?" I was no longer a long-haul truck driver. I was a logistics planner. I was earning less, but I had gained my son. The second step was therapy. I had to find someone who understood Leo's condition, speech impediment, and the trauma he had experienced. On recommendation, we found Dr. Lena Hansen. She specialized in childhood trauma and nonverbal communication. We went to our first session together. Dr. Hansen was a warm but professional woman. She didn't talk directly to Leo. She sat on the floor and started playing with the wooden blocks in the playroom. Leo watched her, hiding behind my leg as usual. 5 minutes later, Dr. Hansen said, looking at Leo, "You know, sometimes words are too heavy. That's why I prefer to draw." She took out paper and crayons. I remembered those black scribbles, those dark drawings. Leo slowly emerged from his hiding place and approached the table. He picked up the black pastel crayon. After that session, Dr. Hansen spoke to me alone. "Arthur, Leo's situation is complicated," he said seriously. "The abuser used his biggest disadvantage, his inability to speak, as his greatest weapon. He silenced him not only physically, but also psychologically." "How so?" "He sent him the message, 'Even if you speak, no one will believe you because you can't speak.' That tape wasn't just to block a whisper. That tape was to erase his identity, his right to exist. That's why he doesn't want to leave you. Your absence means not protection, but the return of torture for him." While all this was happening, Elara's lawyers weren't sitting idle. They filed a counterclaim to have the protection order and temporary custody lifted. Their claims were exactly as my lawyer had warned. Arthur Sterling was an unstable truck driver who had been away from home for years. He had never cared about his son's special needs, his disability. This sudden custody request was a hysterical move to control his wife. They claimed the video had been taken out of context, misunderstood, and was a difficult moment of a desperate mother trying to discipline her nonverbal son. "Calm down, Arthur," my lawyer said on the phone. "This is an expected defense. Disgusting, but expected. Our cards are stronger." "What cards?" "Your sacrifice, your new job, being home every night, and most importantly, Dr. Hansen's report." That moment happened during the third therapy session. Dr. Hansen had placed a family playhouse and small baby figures in the playroom. A father, dressed as a truck driver, a mother, a child slightly smaller than the others, and a miniature object shaped like a hairbrush. Leo scanned the room. First, he picked up the father figure, stroked the truck driver's cap. Then he took it and placed it far away from the playhouse in the far corner of the room. "On the road," he said, pointing. Then he picked up the mother figure. He looked at her for a moment. And then he picked up the child figure and placed it in the bedroom of the house. He laid it on the bed. Then his little fingers hesitantly reached for the miniature hairbrush. He picked it up and placed it in the mother figure's hand. Then he tore off a small piece from the Play-Doh box on the table and stuck it on the child's face. Dr. Hansen and I were watching from behind a one-way mirror. I felt a lump in my throat. "Did you see that?" whispered Dr. Hansen. "He's reenacting the trauma. The father's absence put it away. The mother's aggression gave her the brush. And the silencing, sticking the clay on his face." After that session, Dr. Hansen began preparing a report to be submitted to the court. My lawyer also asked his opinion about the request for supervised visits. "Absolutely not," Dr. Hansen said clearly. Any contact with her mother at this point would completely sabotage the healing process. It would re-traumatize the child. I will state this in my report. The judge will take it into consideration. That night when we got home, I told Leo about my new job. "I won't be out on the road at night anymore, champ," I said, showing him a photo of my new, boring office. "I'll be home every evening. I'll take you to school every morning. No more leaving." Leo stared at the photo for a long time. Then he looked at me, and then for the first time in months, I saw a genuine, heartfelt smile spread across his little face. He ran and hugged my neck. In that moment, the salary I had lost, my career, didn't matter in the slightest. A few days later, we received the official notice from Elara's lawyers. The request to lift the restraining order had been denied. Dr. Hansen's report and Leo's confession in play therapy had been decisive. The judge had ruled that Elara must undergo mandatory psychiatric evaluation and begin anger management treatment before having any contact with her son. This was a major victory, but the battle wasn't over. We still had the permanent custody hearing ahead of us. Elara wouldn't give up easily. But that night, as my son slept peacefully beside me, I sat on the balcony and thought about everything we had been through. The road was long, but for the first time in a long time, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel today. Almost 2 years after that fateful night when I placed that small, hidden camera in my son's room, our lives have taken a completely different path. The small apartment we rented is now our home, a modest place but our castle, with a small garden where Leo can play. I have a stable job as a logistics planner. No more long trips. I'm home every night. Every morning I prepare breakfast for my son and drop him off at his new school, which has a wonderful program for children with special needs. Leo is now 10 years old. Those terrifying nightmares that used to be frequent have become memories that occur once or twice a month and are quickly calmed. He continues therapy with Dr. Hansen, but they have shifted their focus from processing the trauma to looking toward the future. Leo's recovery didn't happen when he started talking. That was never the goal. His recovery happened when he learned not to be afraid to communicate. He no longer whispers. He speaks with confident gestures. He uses the communication tablet provided by the school, which replaced those stupid communication cards, like a virtuoso. Those black scribbles? They've been replaced by bright colors, detailed truck drawings, and my favorite, pictures of him and me holding hands. At school, he's made a small group of friends who, like him, have special needs. Recently, he became the mascot for the football team. Seeing the joy on his face as he cheered for the team from the sidelines with a friend in a wheelchair. Those moments show that every struggle I've endured has been worth it. As for Elara, the justice system, albeit slowly, found its way. The permanent custody hearing was shorter than I expected. Her lawyer's claims of an unstable father and illegal registration fell apart in the face of the evidence. The video was shocking. But Dr. Hansen's report and Leo's testimony about how he described the trauma without words in play therapy, the moment he put the father figure away and gave the brush to the mother figure, were decisive. Elara's defense, the difficulty of disciplining. A child who cannot speak drew the judge's anger. As the judge read the verdict, he stated, "This is not a defense. It is an aggravating factor. A child's silence is not an opportunity to abuse them, but a responsibility to protect them further." Elara was found guilty of aggravated child abuse. She lost her parental rights completely and permanently. She was sentenced to mandatory psychiatric treatment. Hala is still trying to regain supervised visitation rights, claiming she has recovered and is remorseful. The judge wisely ruled that any contact could only occur with Leo's therapist's approval and at Leo's own request. To date, my son has shown no interest in seeing his mother again. When the subject comes up, he calmly types on his tablet, "No, not safe." Dr. Hansen says this is a healthy boundary, a right that was taken away for so long. As for Marcus and Clara, they are no longer just my uncle and aunt. They are Leo's second family, my confidants. Marcus's courage to choose what was right for his own sister saved my son's life. I can never repay my debt to them. Today, there's a reason I'm sharing this story on this channel. I'm Lonesome Hall Dad. By the nature of my work, I was used to silence, to lonely roads. But I couldn't hear the cry for help in the silence of my own home. Elara maintained the image of a perfect, self-sacrificing mother in everyone's eyes. Neighbors, family, even to a point teachers. No one suspected what she did behind closed doors. No one would believe that perfect mother was capable of hurting a frightened child who had neither the voice nor the strength to defend themselves. I learned to be alert to the signs. Those dark drawings, those blank eyes, those silent sobs. These weren't just phase-outs. They were nonverbal cries for help that I, unfortunately, was too late to hear. To the parents watching me, especially those who have to be away from their children because of work, I leave you with a piece of advice born of pain and experience. Trust your instincts. If something seems wrong with your child, it probably is. Talk to your children, but more importantly, listen to them. Listen not only to what they say, but also to what they don't say, to what they express through their behavior, drawings, signs, and silences. And remember, there is no justification for violence against children. This is not discipline. This is pure and simple abuse. Our story, despite all the pain, had a happy ending. Leo is safe, healing, and growing up surrounded by love. But not all stories end this way. If this story touched your heart, leave a like to make this dad feel happy. Subscribe to the Lonesome Hall Dad channel right now, so you don't miss the next life stories I'll tell with all my heart. And tell me in the comments where you watched this video and what time it was there. If you know of a similar case, or had to make a difficult decision to protect a child, share your experience. Knowing which city you're watching from and reading your experiences makes this dad very happy. A hug as big as my heart. See you in the next life story. With love and respect,